Zareth adjusted her viewing device and looked at the ancient stone tablet one more time. The symbols carved into the rock were old, very old. They told stories of warriors from a planet called Terra. These warriors could fight for days without rest. They could survive wounds that would kill any other being. They never gave up even when facing certain death. She smiled and shook her head. These stories were clearly made up. No species could be that strong or that stubborn. Her people, the Velkari, had studied war for thousands of years. They knew that every species had limits. Pain would break anyone eventually. Fear would make anyone run. Death would stop anyone from fighting. But the stories about these Terran warriors were different. They spoke of beings who grew stronger when hurt. They fought harder when scared. They kept going even after they should have died. It was impossible. But the stories appeared on worlds across the galaxy. Someone had spread these tales far and wide. Zareth was a xenoarchaeologist. She studied old cultures and dead civilizations. She had spent 5 years collecting these warrior stories from different planets. Her research showed that they all started about 10,000 years ago. Then they suddenly stopped. No new stories appeared after that date. Her theory was simple. Some ancient species had created these stories to scare their enemies. They made up tales about super warriors who could not be defeated. When people heard these stories, they would surrender without fighting. It was clever, but it was just a trick. The door to her lab opened with a soft hiss. Her assistant Kethvar walked in carrying a datapad. His blue skin looked pale and his usual calm expression was gone. "Professor Zareth," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "We have a problem." She looked up from her work. "What kind of problem?" "A ship has arrived at the station. It's requesting permission to dock." He paused and took a deep breath. "It's a human ship." Zareth stared at him. "That's impossible. Humans are not real. They're just characters from old stories." Kethavar handed her the datapad. "The ship is called the UES Discovery. It has 53 crew members. They say they're from a planet called Earth in the Sol system. They need supplies and fuel." She looked at the data on the screen. The ship was real. The crew was real. The planet Earth was a real location that their computers could find on star maps. Her hand started to shake as she read the information. "This changes everything," she whispered. Station Commander Veltos called an emergency meeting. All the senior staff gathered in the main conference room. Zareth sat quietly in the back, still trying to understand what this meant for her research. "The humans seem friendly," Commander Veltos said. "They've shared their medical records and ship specifications. They've agreed to all our security procedures. I see no reason to refuse them docking permission." Dr. Nalthari, the station's biologist, raised a tentacle. "What do we know about human biology?" "Very little," the commander admitted. "They're carbon-based like us. They breathe oxygen. They're about the same size as Velkari. They seem normal in every way." Zareth stood up slowly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Commander, I request permission to interview the human crew." "For what purpose?" "I've been studying stories about human warriors for 5 years. If humans are real, then maybe those stories are real too. This could be the most important discovery in galactic history." The commander thought for a moment. "Very well. But be careful. We don't know anything about their culture or customs." 2 hours later, Zareth stood in docking bay 7, waiting for the human ship to arrive. Her heart was beating fast. She had spent years proving that these warriors were myths. Now she might meet one face to face. The UES Discovery was smaller than she expected. It looked sturdy and practical, not like the warships from the old stories. When the airlock opened, a woman stepped out first. She had brown skin and black hair tied back in a simple style. She wore a blue uniform with patches and symbols. "Hello," the woman said in perfect galactic standard language. "I'm Dr. Lisa Martinez, the ship's anthropologist. Thank you for letting us dock." Zareth bowed politely. "I'm Professor Zareth. Welcome to Kepler 7 Research Station." More humans came out of their ship. They all looked normal. They walked like everyone else. They talked like everyone else. They seemed friendly and polite. Where were the mighty warriors from the stories? Dr. Martinez noticed her confused expression. "Is something wrong?" "I study ancient stories about human warriors," Zareth said carefully. "The tales describe beings of great strength and courage." Lisa laughed. "Those are probably just old war stories. Soldiers always make themselves sound braver than they really are." "So humans do have warriors?" "Well, we have a military, if that's what you mean. But we're scientists, not soldiers." Lisa paused. although we do have Commander Jake Sullivan on board. He's our security officer. He used to be in the military. Zareth felt her pulse quicken. Could I meet him? I suppose so. He's probably in the cargo bay, helping with the supply transfer. They walked through the station corridors toward the cargo area. Other humans were already working with station personnel, moving boxes and equipment. They seemed efficient and organized, but nothing special. Then Zareth saw him. Commander Jake Sullivan was tall, with short brown hair and green eyes. He wore the same blue uniform as the others, but something about him was different. He moved with purpose and awareness. His eyes constantly scanned the area around him. When he spoke to the cargo workers, they listened and obeyed without question. Jake, Dr. Martinez called out. Someone wants to meet you. He turned and walked over to them. His movements were smooth and controlled. When he looked at Zareth, she felt like he was seeing everything about her in just a few seconds. Ma'am, he said politely, extending his hand. Zareth had read about this human gesture. She reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm but not painful. His skin was warm and calloused from hard work. I'm studying stories about human warriors, she said. Dr. Martinez said you were in the military. Jake nodded. Yes, ma'am. Marine Corps, 12 years of service. The stories describe warriors with incredible abilities. They could fight multiple opponents. They could survive terrible wounds. They never gave up, no matter what happened. Jake was quiet for a moment. Stories tend to grow in the telling, he said finally. We're just people doing our jobs. But as he spoke, Zareth noticed something in his eyes. There was a hardness there, a depth that spoke of things seen and done. Maybe the stories weren't completely made up after all. Would you be willing to answer some questions about human military culture? She asked. Jake looked at Dr. Martinez, who nodded. I suppose that would be all right, he said. As long as it doesn't compromise operational security. Zareth smiled. She was about to learn if the legends were true. The next morning, Zareth prepared her questions carefully. She had spent all night reading every story about human warriors she could find. The tales all mentioned the same things: incredible speed, perfect aim, and the ability to think quickly in dangerous situations. She met Jake in the station's small conference room. He sat across from her, relaxed but alert. Dr. Martinez was there too, along with Kethvar, who was recording everything. Let's start with basic training, Zareth said, reading from her notes. The stories say human warriors trained constantly, even when not at war. Jake nodded. That's true. We train every day. Physical fitness, weapons practice, tactical exercises. A warrior who doesn't train is a dead warrior. The stories say humans could run for hours without stopping. Depends on the human and the situation, Jake said. I've done 20-mile runs in full gear. Others have done more, Zareth made a note. 20 miles was over 30 kilometers. Most Velkari could barely run 5 kilometers without resting. What about pain tolerance? She asked. The stories say human warriors could fight even when badly wounded. Jake was quiet for a moment. Pain is just information, he said finally. It tells you something is wrong, but it doesn't have to stop you from doing what needs to be done. Could you demonstrate some of these abilities? Dr. Martinez looked worried. I'm not sure that's a good idea. But Jake was already thinking. The station has a training facility, right? With safety protocols and medical staff on standby? Yes, Kethvar said. It's used for emergency response training. I could run through some basic exercises, Jake said. Nothing dangerous. 2 hours later, a small crowd had gathered in the training facility. Word had spread quickly through the station that the human was going to demonstrate warrior techniques. Commander Veltos was there, along with most of the senior staff. Even some crew members from other ships had come to watch. The training facility was a large room with padded floors and walls. Computer systems could create holographic enemies and obstacles. It was normally used to train security personnel for emergency situations. Jake had changed into simple exercise clothes. He looked smaller than he had in uniform, but his muscles were clearly defined. He moved with the same controlled grace Zareth had noticed before. What would you like to see? He asked. Zareth looked at her notes. The stories mentioned something called close quarters combat, fighting multiple enemies in a small space. The computer technician, a young Velkari named Sothan, programmed the system. I'll start with 3 opponents, he said. Basic combat androids. 3 holographic figures appeared around Jake. They were armed with energy weapons that would deliver a painful but harmless shock if they hit their target. Jake would have only his hands and whatever he could find in the room. "Begin simulation," the computer announced. Jake moved immediately. He didn't wait for the enemies to attack first. He grabbed a training staff from a wall rack and spun it in his hands like he had been born holding it. The first hologram fired at him, but Jake was no longer where the shot was aimed. He moved like water, flowing around the attacks. When one enemy got too close, he struck with the staff. The hologram flickered and disappeared, eliminated from the simulation. The second enemy tried to circle behind him, but Jake seemed to know exactly where it was without looking. The watching crowd gasped as Jake spun and threw the staff like a spear. It passed through the second hologram's center mass. Another elimination. The third enemy fired rapidly, forcing Jake to dive and roll across the floor. He came up near another equipment rack and grabbed a training shield. The final hologram advanced, trying to get a clear shot. Jake used the shield to deflect the energy blasts, then charged forward. He slammed the shield into the hologram and followed with a strike that would have broken ribs on a real opponent. "Simulation complete," the computer announced. Time 47 seconds. Casualties 0. The room was completely silent. 47 seconds to defeat 3 armed opponents. Zarth had seen Valkyrie security officers take 10 minutes to complete the same exercise, and they usually suffered multiple hits in the process. "That was impressive," Commander Veltos said slowly, but the computer was probably set to an easy level. Sothan checked his controls. "No, sir. That was standard difficulty. The same level we use for security training." Jake was breathing heavily but didn't seem exhausted. "Want to try something harder?" he asked. 6 opponents, Zareth said before she could stop herself. "Maximum difficulty." Dr. Martinez grabbed her arm. "That's too dangerous." "The safety protocols will prevent serious injury," Commander Veltos said. "But 6 opponents at maximum difficulty has never been completed by anyone." Jake stretched his shoulders and picked up 2 training batons. "Let's see what happens." This time the holograms were faster and smarter. They coordinated their attacks and used cover. Their weapons fired more accurately and more often. Jake had to work harder, diving behind obstacles and using the room's equipment as weapons. But something strange happened as the fight went on. Instead of getting tired, Jake seemed to get better. His movements became sharper, his attacks more precise. When one enemy cornered him behind a barrier, he grabbed a piece of broken equipment and threw it with perfect accuracy, creating an opening to escape. The crowd watched in amazement as Jake fought like he could see the future. He dodged attacks that seemed impossible to avoid. He struck enemies in exactly the right spots to disable them instantly. When the last hologram fell, the timer showed 2 minutes and 18 seconds. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Nalthari. "The reflexes required for that performance exceed any known biological limits." Jake set down the training weapons and wiped sweat from his face. "Not bad for a warm-up," he said with a small smile. But then something went wrong. The computer system started flashing error messages. The safety protocols had malfunctioned during the intense simulation. The room's automated defense systems activated, treating everyone inside as hostile targets. Energy beams started firing from hidden emitters in the ceiling. The crowd screamed and ran for the exits, but the doors had locked automatically. They were trapped with weapons firing at them from all directions. Jake reacted instantly. He grabbed Zareth and pulled her behind a training barrier, just as an energy beam passed through the space where she had been standing. "Stay down," he said calmly. Other people were not so lucky. Dr. Martinez cried out as a beam grazed her shoulder. Kethavar was pinned behind inadequate cover, unable to reach the exit. The energy beams were set to training levels, but they could still cause serious injuries. Jake looked around the room, assessing the situation. The weapons were firing in a pattern, but it was complex and changing. Most people would panic and run blindly, but Jake was different. He moved from cover to cover, staying ahead of the energy beams by fractions of seconds. When he reached Dr. Martinez, he picked her up and carried her to safety. Then he went back for Kethvar, timing his movements perfectly to avoid the automated weapons. "The control panel," Sothan called out. "If someone can reach it, I can shut down the system." The control panel was across the room, directly in the line of fire from multiple weapons. It would be suicide to try reaching it, but Jake was already moving. He ran in a zigzag pattern, diving and rolling to avoid the energy beams. One beam singed his arm, but he kept going. Another passed so close to his head that it burned his hair. But somehow, impossibly, he reached the control panel. Sothan guided him through the shutdown procedure while energy beams continued firing around them. Jake's hands moved steadily on the controls, even as explosions of light flashed all around him. The weapons powered down. The doors unlocked. Emergency medical teams rushed in to check for injuries. Most people had minor burns or shock, but everyone was alive. Commander Veltos stared at Jake in disbelief. "How did you do that?" Jake shrugged. "Training," he said simply, but Zarath was beginning to understand. The old stories weren't exaggerated. If anything, they hadn't told the whole truth. She was looking at something that most of the galaxy thought was impossible, a real human warrior. And this was just the beginning. News of Jake's performance in the training facility spread quickly throughout the station. Within hours, everyone was talking about the human who had defeated 6 opponents and saved people from the malfunctioning defense system. But one person was not impressed. Prime Scholar Velanor arrived on the evening transport 3 days after the incident. He was Zarath's former teacher and one of the most respected xenoarchaeologists in the galaxy. When Zarath sent him her initial reports about human warriors, he had decided to come see for himself. Velanor was old, even by Velkari standards. His skin had the deep purple color that came with age, and his movements were slow and careful. But his mind was still sharp, and he had no patience for what he called unscientific speculation. "You disappoint me, Zarath," he said as they walked through the station corridors. 5 years of solid research, and now you're ready to throw it all away because of one impressive athletic display. But Master, you didn't see what I saw. Jake's abilities were beyond anything we've recorded for any species. Abilities can be faked, Velanor said firmly. Holographic simulations can be programmed. Records can be altered. I've seen species try to intimidate their enemies with false demonstrations before. They stopped outside the conference room where Jake was waiting. Through the transparent door, they could see him sitting quietly, reading something on a datapad. He looked completely normal and unremarkable. "That," Velanor said, pointing at Jake, "is supposed to be a legendary warrior? He looks like any other mid-level technician." Zarath started to protest, but her teacher held up a hand for silence. "I've brought testing equipment from the university. Real scientific instruments, not training room toys. If this human is truly exceptional, the data will prove it. If not, we can return to proper research." The next morning, they gathered in the medical bay. Dr. Ben Carter, the Discovery's psychologist, had joined them along with Dr. Martinez and several station personnel. Velanor's testing equipment filled half the room. Neural scanners, stress monitors, pain measurement devices, and psychological evaluation systems. "The tests are based on data from the old stories," Velanor explained to Jake. "If the tales are true, you should be able to perform at levels that no other species has achieved." Jake looked at the complex machinery with mild interest. "What exactly will these tests measure? Pain tolerance, decision-making under stress, psychological breaking points, and physical endurance limits," Velanor said. "The legendary warriors were said to be unbreakable." "We shall see," Dr. Carter looked worried. "Some of these tests could cause permanent damage." "The subject volunteered," Velanor replied coldly. "And the safety protocols will prevent any serious harm." The first test was simple. Pain tolerance. Electrodes attached to Jake's arm would deliver increasing levels of electrical stimulation. Most species reached their breaking point at level 7 out of 10. The Velkari record was level 8, achieved by a champion athlete who trained for months. "Begin at level 1, Velanor instructed the technician. Jake felt the first shock and nodded. "Barely noticeable, level 2, then 3. Jake's expression didn't change. His vital signs remained steady. At level 5, most test subjects were gritting their teeth and sweating. Jake looked bored. "Level 7, the technician announced nervously. This was the point where most beings begged to stop. Jake winced slightly but said nothing. "Level 8. Jake's jaw tightened, but his breathing remained controlled. The pain was clearly intense, but he wasn't fighting it or trying to escape it. He was simply enduring it. Level 9. Now Jake was sweating and his muscles were tense. But when Velanor asked if he wanted to continue, Jake just nodded. Level 10. Maximum setting. The electrical shock would have rendered most beings unconscious. Jake gasped and his whole body went rigid. But after a few seconds, he relaxed and looked directly at Velinor. "Is that all?" he asked. The room was silent. No one had ever reached level 10 and remained conscious, let alone asked for more. The technician checked his equipment 3 times to make sure it was working correctly. The second test was psychological, decision-making under extreme stress. Jake was placed in a virtual reality simulation, where he had to make rapid choices while under intense pressure. The scenario involved a burning building with multiple people trapped inside. He had to decide who to save first, knowing that some would die regardless of his choices. Most test subjects broke down crying or became paralyzed by the impossible decisions. Jake methodically worked through each scenario, making quick, logical choices based on who had the best chance of survival. Even when the simulation forced him to abandon children to save adults or sacrifice friends to save strangers, his decisions never wavered. "Remarkable," Dr. Carter whispered. "He's treating each choice as a tactical problem, not an emotional crisis." The third test pushed Jake's loyalty and moral boundaries. The simulation placed him in situations where he had to choose between following orders and doing what seemed right. In one scenario, he was ordered to abandon wounded teammates. In another, he was commanded to fire on civilian targets. Other species typically chose self-preservation or blindly followed authority. But Jake found a third option every time. He would follow the spirit of his orders while protecting innocent people, even if it meant putting himself in danger. "He's rewriting the parameters of each test," Velinor observed. "Instead of accepting the given choices, he's creating new solutions." The final test was pure endurance. Jake was placed on a running machine while wearing full equipment. The speed and incline would increase gradually until his body could no longer continue. The record for any species was 43 minutes. Jake started at a steady pace, his breathing controlled and even. After 20 minutes, when most beings were struggling, he looked like he was just getting warmed up. At 30 minutes, he was still maintaining perfect form. At 40 minutes, he wasn't even breathing heavily. 50 minutes passed. Then 60. The machine was now running at its maximum settings, a steep uphill sprint that should have been impossible to maintain. But Jake kept running, his pace never faltering. "How is this possible?" the technician asked. "His heart rate is elevated, but it's not in the danger zone. His muscle activity shows no signs of fatigue." At 75 minutes, Jake finally spoke. "How much longer do you need me to keep this up?" Velinor stared at the readouts in disbelief. "You can stop whenever you feel you need to." "I don't need to stop," Jake said, still running at full speed. "But I'm getting hungry, and I promised Dr. Martinez I'd help her with some research this afternoon." They stopped the test. Jake had been running at maximum intensity for 75 minutes and showed no signs of fatigue. He stepped off the machine, grabbed a towel to wipe the sweat from his face, and asked if anyone wanted to get lunch. Later that evening, Velinor sat alone in his quarters, staring at the test results. Every measurement was beyond what should have been possible. The pain tolerance results suggested a being that could function normally, while experiencing agony that would disable anyone else. The psychological test showed someone who could make clear decisions in situations that would drive others insane. The endurance test recorded performance levels that defied known biological laws. Zarath knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. "Master, what do you think?" Velinor was quiet for a long time. "I think," he said finally, "that we need to reconsider everything we know about human evolution." "Then you believe the stories are true?" "The stories," Velinor said slowly, "may have actually understated the truth. If this single human is representative of his species' military personnel, then the galaxy has been living with a very dangerous misconception." "What do you mean?" Velinor turned to look at her. "We've spent centuries believing that humans were myths. But what if they're real? And what if they've been quietly spreading throughout the galaxy without anyone realizing what they truly are?" Outside, the station's sensors detected several ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The ships were using technology that the computers couldn't identify, but their energy signatures matched, something in the historical database, something that had been extinct for 10,000 years. The Hargoth had returned, and now humanity would show the galaxy why they had become legends in the first place. The alarm started screaming at 3 in the morning, station time. Zarath woke up in her quarters, confused and frightened. She had never heard the emergency alert system before. Red lights flashed in the corridors as she ran toward the command center. Commander Veltos was already there, surrounded by panicking officers. The main display showed 5 large ships approaching the station. Their design was unlike anything in the current galactic database, but the computer had found a match in the historical archives. Hargoth warships, the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Configuration matches vessels that disappeared 10,000 years ago. Zareth felt her blood turn cold. Every schoolchild learned about the Hargoth in history class. They were the apex predators of the ancient galaxy, a species that lived only for war and conquest. They had destroyed hundreds of civilizations before mysteriously vanishing without a trace. How is that possible? Commander Veltos asked. The Hargoth have been extinct for millennia. Maybe they were just sleeping, someone suggested weakly. The communications officer looked up from her station. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead ship. Put it on screen. The image that appeared made everyone step back in horror. The Hargoth commander looked exactly like the monsters from old historical records. Its skin was dark gray and covered with natural armor plates. Its eyes were black and seemed to absorb light. When it spoke, rows of sharp teeth were visible in its oversized mouth. Inferior beings, the creature said in ancient galactic standard. This system now belongs to the Hargoth Empire. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Commander Veltos tried to keep his voice steady. This is Kepler 7 Research Station. We are a scientific facility with no military capabilities. We pose no threat to anyone. The Hargoth commander laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. All non-Hargoth life is a threat. You have one of your time units to evacuate this system. After that, we will demonstrate why the galaxy learned to fear us. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in terrified silence. Can we evacuate? Veltos asked. The navigation officer checked his instruments. Not everyone, sir. We have over 2,000 people on the station. The civilian transports can only carry about half that number. And the Hargoth ships are already moving to block the main hyperspace routes. What about weapons? Defenses? The station has standard defensive shields and some mining lasers we could use as weapons, the tactical officer replied. But against Hargoth warships, the historical records show they destroyed entire fleets. Zareth found herself thinking about Jake. Where were the humans during this crisis? She left the command center and ran toward the docking bay where the Discovery was birthed. She found Jake in the ship's cargo hold, along with Dr. Martinez and several other crew members. But they weren't panicking like everyone else. Instead, they were calmly unpacking military equipment from hidden storage compartments. Jake, Zareth called out. Did you hear the announcement? The Hargoth are back. He looked up from a crate of weapons. We heard. Dr. Martinez is organizing the evacuation of non-essential personnel. I'm preparing defensive measures. Defensive measures? Jake, these are the Hargoth. They conquered half the galaxy before they disappeared. What can one human do against them? Jake continued unpacking equipment. I can do my job. Dr. Martinez approached them carrying a communication device. I've contacted Earth Command. Admiral Kate Morrison is bringing the 3rd Fleet, but they won't arrive for at least 6 hours. We have to hold out until then. 6 hours? Zareth stared at them in disbelief. The station's defenses won't last 6 minutes against Hargoth warships. Then we'll have to improve the station's defenses, Jake said simply. He walked to the communication panel and activated the station-wide address system. This is Commander Jake Sullivan of the Earth Defense Force. All station personnel, please report to your emergency stations. We are implementing immediate defensive protocols. Zareth followed Jake as he moved through the station with purpose and confidence. He seemed to know exactly what needed to be done, as if he had planned for this situation long before it happened. In the engineering section, he found Chief Engineer Sam Rodriguez, another human from the Discovery. Sam was already working with the station's technical staff to modify the power systems. Can you boost the shield generators? Jake asked. I can reroute power from non-essential systems, Sam replied. That might give us 20% more shield strength. What about the mining lasers? I can reconfigure them as defensive weapons, but they're not designed for combat. Against Hargoth armor, they'll be like throwing rocks at a battleship. Jake thought for a moment. What if we focus the beams? Instead of trying to damage their hulls, we target their sensors and weapon systems. Sam's eyes lit up. That might work. Precision strikes instead of brute force. Very human thinking. They worked quickly, transforming the peaceful research station into something resembling a fortress. Humans took charge of the effort, their calm confidence spreading to the alien personnel. Even though everyone knew the situation was hopeless, people stopped panicking and started working. Zareth watched Jake coordinate the defense preparations and realized something important. This wasn't just one human warrior. The entire crew of the Discovery was moving with the same purpose, the same determination. They all had the same look in their eyes that she had seen in Jake. The hardness that came from facing death and refusing to accept defeat. The hour was almost up when the Hargoth ships opened fire. The first barrage hit the station's shields with tremendous force. The entire structure shook and lights flickered throughout the corridors. But the shields held barely. "Return fire," Jake ordered from his position in the command center. The modified mining lasers lanced out toward the Hargoth ships. As Sam had predicted, they couldn't penetrate the enemy armor. But Jake's precision targeting worked. One beam struck a weapon turret, disabling it. Another hit a sensor array, creating a blind spot in the enemy's defenses. The Hargoth commander appeared on the communication screen again, and for the first time, he looked surprised rather than confident. "Impossible," he snarled. "This station should have been destroyed already. What manner of beings dare to resist the Hargoth?" Jake stepped forward so the alien could see him clearly. "Human beings." The Hargoth commander stared at the screen for a long moment. "Human, that word is not in our database." "You are a new species." "We're not new," Jake said calmly. "We've been here all along. You just never noticed us before." "It matters not. You will die like all the others." The Hargoth ships increased their attack, firing continuously at the station's defenses. The shields began to fail under the sustained assault. Sections of the station's outer hull were breached, and emergency force fields activated to maintain atmosphere. But something strange was happening. Instead of becoming more desperate as the situation worsened, the humans became more focused. They worked with increased efficiency, finding solutions to problems that should have been unsolvable. When the primary shield generator failed, Sam and his team had a backup system online within minutes. When the main communications array was destroyed, they established a backup network using the station's internal systems. When the Hargoth tried to jam their sensors, Jake found ways to track the enemy ships using passive detection methods. "How are you doing this?" Commander Veltos asked Jake as explosions rocked the station around them. "Experience," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off the tactical display. "Humans have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. We've learned a few things along the way." The battle continued for hours. The station was badly damaged and many people were injured, but they were still alive. The Hargoth, who had expected an easy victory, found themselves in a prolonged fight against an enemy that refused to give up. Finally, the enemy commander called for a temporary ceasefire. When his image appeared on the screen, he no longer looked confident. Instead, he seemed confused and frustrated. "What are you?" he demanded. "Our weapons should have destroyed your station hours ago. Our tactics have conquered thousands of worlds. Yet you continue to resist." Jake was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his uniform was torn and dirty, but his voice was steady when he answered. "We're what happens when a species evolves on a world where everything is trying to kill them. We're what you get when natural selection favors the ones who never give up. We're humans, and we don't know how to surrender." The Hargoth commander was about to respond when new signals appeared on the sensor displays. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, dozens of them, all bearing the insignia of the Earth Defense Force. Admiral Kate Morrison's voice came over the communication system, calm and professional. "This is Admiral Morrison commanding the Third Fleet. Hargoth vessels, you are hereby ordered to withdraw from this system immediately." The Hargoth commander looked at the overwhelming number of human warships surrounding his small fleet. For the first time in 10,000 years, the apex predators of the galaxy felt something they had almost forgotten. They felt afraid. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the tactical display with calm satisfaction. Her fleet had arrived just in time. The 5 Hargoth warships were now surrounded by 37 human vessels, ranging from massive battleships to fast attack cruisers. On Kepler 7 station, Zareth stared at the view screen in amazement. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, each ship taking its assigned position without any visible confusion or delay. It was like watching a single organism with many parts. "This is Admiral Morrison to Kepler 7 station. came the voice over the communications system. "Commander Sullivan, please report your status." Jake responded immediately. "Admiral, the station is secure but heavily damaged. We have multiple hull breaches and shield failure, but no critical system losses. Casualty reports are still coming in, but most injuries are minor." "Understood, Commander. Excellent work holding the line." The Hargoth commander was watching the human fleet with growing concern. His 5 ships were powerful, but they were vastly outnumbered. More importantly, these humans had demonstrated something he had never seen before: the ability to turn a hopeless defensive situation into a successful holding action. "Human Admiral," he said through gritted teeth, "you have impressive numbers, but we are Hargoth. We do not retreat from inferior species." Admiral Morrison's response was calm and professional. "I'm not asking you to retreat. I'm ordering you to leave. You attacked a peaceful research station without provocation. That was a mistake. We do not take orders from prey species." "Then let me make this simple for you," Morrison said. "You have 2 choices. You can leave this system now, or we can show you why humans became the dominant military force in this galaxy while you were taking your 10,000-year nap." The Hargoth commander laughed, but it sounded forced. "Dominant military force? Impossible. We have never heard of humans before today." "That's because we don't usually announce ourselves," Morrison replied. "We prefer to work quietly. But when someone attacks our people, we make exceptions." On the station, Dr. Martinez was treating wounded personnel in the emergency medical bay. Zareth found her there, bandaging a cut on Kethvar's arm. "Dr. Martinez," Zareth said, "is it true? Are humans really the dominant military power in the galaxy?" Lisa looked up from her work. "We don't like to advertise it," she said. "Most species are more comfortable thinking of us as explorers and scientists. But yes, the Earth Defense Force is probably the largest military organization currently active." "How large?" "Large enough," Lisa said diplomatically. "We have ships and personnel throughout known space. Most of the time we just watch and learn. But when someone threatens innocent people," she gestured toward the view screen, where the human fleet was maintaining its perfect formation around the Hargoth ships. Back in the command center, the standoff was continuing. The Hargoth commander was trying to find some way to save face while retreating from a superior force. But the humans were not giving him any easy options. "Your species will be added to our target list," he threatened. "The Hargoth Empire will return with a larger fleet." "No," Admiral Morrison said simply. "You won't. You cannot stop the Hargoth expansion. We already have. You see, while you were sleeping for 10,000 years, we studied your old battles. We know exactly how your species thinks and fights. We've been preparing for your return." Jake stepped forward. "Admiral, if I may?" "Go ahead, Commander." Jake looked directly at the Hargoth commander. "Your species made one critical error in your tactical thinking. You assumed that military strength comes from superior technology and natural aggression, but that's not where real strength comes from. Enlighten me, human. Real strength comes from the willingness to sacrifice for others. It comes from fighting not because you enjoy it, but because someone has to protect the innocent. It comes from standing up to bullies even when the odds are against you." The Hargoth commander sneered. "Weakness, sentiment, these things make you vulnerable." "Do we look vulnerable to you right now?" Jake asked. The alien looked at the tactical display, where his 5 ships were completely surrounded by human vessels. He looked at the damaged station, which should have been destroyed hours ago but was still functioning. He looked at the humans themselves, who showed no signs of fear or uncertainty, despite having just survived a desperate battle. For the first time in his species' history, a Hargoth commander began to understand that there might be something more dangerous than natural predators in the galaxy. A species that chose to be warriors, not for conquest, but for protection. "This is not over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Admiral Morrison replied. "Your ships will leave this system immediately. Any Hargoth vessel that approaches human territory or attacks any peaceful installation will be destroyed without warning. Consider this your only notice." The Hargoth ships powered their engines and slowly moved away from the station. As they retreated, their commander sent one final message: "The galaxy will learn to fear the Hargoth once again." Admiral Morrison's response was quiet, but carried clearly over the communication system. The galaxy already learned to fear something much worse than the Hargoth. They learned to respect humans. And respect, Commander, is something that has to be earned. The Hargoth fleet jumped to hyperspace and disappeared. Hours later, After the immediate crisis had passed, Zareth found herself in the station's observation lounge. The human fleet was still there, but the ships were now helping with repairs and evacuation of the wounded. Jake joined her at the large window, looking out at the stars. He had cleaned up and changed uniforms, but she could still see the exhaustion in his eyes. "I owe you an apology," Zareth said. "For what?" "I spent 5 years trying to prove that human warriors were just legends. I was completely wrong." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You weren't completely wrong. The stories probably did exaggerate some things. But you really can do everything the legends claimed. You really are unbreakable." "No," Jake said firmly. "We're not unbreakable. We just don't let being broken stop us from doing what needs to be done." Zareth thought about this. Is that what makes humans different? The ability to keep functioning even when you're damaged? Maybe. Or maybe it's that we learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care whether we survive or not. So we decided to care for each other instead. "And that made you the strongest species in the galaxy?" Jake smiled. "It made us the most stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing." Dr. Martinez approached them carrying a data pad. "Zareth, I have something you might find interesting." Admiral Morrison brought some historical records from Earth Command. She handed over the pad. On the screen was a document titled Project Guardian Classified Historical Analysis. "What is this?" Zareth asked. "The real reason humans spread throughout the galaxy," Lisa explained. "We didn't come out here to explore or colonize. We came because our analysts predicted that the Hargoth would eventually return." Zareth read through the file in amazement. It detailed centuries of preparation. Human settlements established in strategic locations, defensive technologies developed in secret, military personnel trained and positioned throughout known space. "You knew they would come back?" "We suspected," Jake said. "The Hargoth disappearance was too sudden and complete. Species like that don't just die out. They go dormant or they retreat to rebuild. We decided to be ready when they returned." "But why? Why did humans take responsibility for protecting the galaxy?" Jake looked out at the stars again. "Because someone had to. And because we learned something important from our own history. Evil succeeds when good people do nothing." Zareth understood now why the stories about human warriors had spread throughout the galaxy. They weren't just tales told to frighten enemies. They were messages, promises made to anyone who might need help someday. "So the legends were true," she said. "The legends were incomplete," Jake corrected. "They told you about human warriors. But they didn't tell you the most important part." "Which is?" Jake smiled. "We're not fighting for glory or conquest or dominance. We're fighting so that species like yours can study ancient stories in peace, without having to worry about monsters coming back from the dark." Outside the window, the human fleet continued its work, repairing damage and protecting the innocent. The warriors had become legends not because they were myths, but because they were exactly what the galaxy needed them to be. Guardians who asked for nothing in return except the right to keep watch in the darkness. And for Zareth, that was the most remarkable discovery of all.